12 minutes. You might have gotten through all the sources, you might still be looking at some, but at least kind of gives you an idea of what's in the source material. The number that you have here, you have 7 sources. Remember, that number is not going to go below 6, it's not going to go above 8. But regardless of the number of sources, it's always going to tell you that you need to use at least 3 of them. So you're not going to see a situation where it tells you to use 4 or 5. Now, you could be in a situation where I tell you to use 4 or 5, just so that you get pretty familiar and comfortable with using multiple sources. But they'll always stick the number at 3. Remember the parts that kind of work here too. For synthesis, you always kind of get a paragraph that gives you the context, kind of like the angle that they're looking at. So the main thing that you kind of see from this first paragraph, certainly you're getting some history to it, but also the whole idea about due to the loss of revenue, you have some ideas about maybe cutting back on delivery days or other services with the post office. So that kind of at least gives you an idea to look at. Doesn't mean you have to say that you want to cut back on days or other services, but at least kind of gives you the context that they're envisioning you looking at. Your actual prompt in a well-developed essay that argues a clear position on whether the U.S. Postal Service should be restructured to meet the needs of a changing world, and if so, how. You could say, no, it does not need restructured, and you'd have to explain why, but you can pretty much tell they're expecting that you think some kind of change would have to take place. It is understood that you are not taking like an AP economics class, that you're not in business, marketing, or management, that you plan on becoming the CEO of Amazon or any other kind of like online retailer. So there certainly could be some limitations to your knowledge base with it, but you're in the same boat as everyone else. I doubt that many of you, if any, have before this thought about, what can I do to make the post office better? It wouldn't shock me. And that's what they try to do kind of with the synthesis, is they usually are going to come up with questions or ideas that you don't really think about too much, so that it puts everyone on equal billing. Now, if Noelle in 8th grade wrote a research paper about the Postal Service, maybe she has a little bit of an edge on some folks. The chances of something like that happening are pretty slim. And then the last part, you just kind of get a couple little reminders. The main one would be, remember, avoid merely summarizing the sources. Certainly you're going to use the sources, but you want them to enhance your argument. So you have an idea, the sources spark something and gives you more information for it, or you could be in a situation where a source gives you some information, and then that allows you to extend it to something further. Anybody want to get rid of the post office? Scrap it, gone. Just thinking about it. I'm surprised no one at first period said, that they would do it.
Well, it was my initial reaction, but then I realized that all the sources were like supporting Purchase Day, so I switched my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly, I think the sources are sort of kind of pushing you in that direction of let's try to come up with something. I do think if you did want to scrap it, I still think there's enough things with the sources where you can take some pros or cons from them that would allow you to do that argument. So you certainly would have the ability to do that if you wanted. Yeah, and
where are they going to go?
Certainly becoming a little bit of an issue. Now, if you were to say scrap it, then yeah, job placement would be a concern. Within 40 minutes, you cannot write an essay that's going to solve every single issue with it. Same thing if you restructure it, within 40 minutes, you can't write an essay that's going to solve every single predicament that would come up. But they're basically looking to see what are you thinking about, how are you supporting it, and ideas like that. Whether you're thinking about stuff that showed up in the sources or on your own mind, what would be some ideas that you would have to try to tweak it, change it, restructure it? And you could even if you didn't want to scrap it completely, you might kind of start looking at ways to phase it out where it has maybe a little bit of a, I don't know if happy ending is the right term, but at least it's not abrupt, comes to a close.
I was looking at one of them and they had a no mail list suggestion on there, like get rid of junk mail. I'm for that because one, it's annoying just to go through all the junk.
Well, no, they said it's also a huge portion of the profits.
I think it's what, 52%?
Yeah.
I think is the number that gets thrown around for them.
That it should be gone then?
Well, I'm saying, I also took into notice the graph that was I believe it was, yeah.
Junk source E has the junk mail.
That like maybe instead of going, because when the mail volume went down, the mail delivery points rose. So wouldn't you cutting down on that maybe could get rid of some of the delivery points, which could.
The delivery points are people's houses and businesses.
Well, I know, but like.
You'd have for the chart where okay, listen up. Delivery points are continuing to go up. So that's going to be homes, businesses, PO boxes like within post offices, and then also could be like some other kind of drop offs that would happen. So like take for example, you look at North Hills Community, our drop off locations have gone up because new neighborhoods. So Highland Estates, I don't remember what the total house count would be for there, but there's a lot of homes that are certainly going in. You still have Westview Post Office, you still have the one on Seabird and McKnight, and you're still going to have a couple others. So the distribution centers themselves have not changed a whole lot, but those delivery points are going up. You do see with employees that they are going down and volume is going down. So you have fewer pieces of mail spread out at more areas with fewer people getting them there. That can cause a little bit of an issue, certainly when it comes to effectiveness and all those kinds of things.
I don't feel like junk mail is that much of an issue because, like, I mean, I hate my email worse because they're sending them more often. Like, I'm like seeing it, like sometimes something will catch your eye and then you'll be like, oh, it's a coupon or something.
Well, most and certainly like the type of mail you get probably depends, on age and things like that. When my kids get home from school, you have Addie who's in 4th grade. She's just lugging all her crap all over the place, so she's kind of putzing along and talking to friends and not paying attention to like vehicles on the road. Then you have Addie or Sadie who's in 1st grade. Come on, it's 1st grade. It's like the greatest year of your life. So she's like prancing down the street. What's the first place that she stops before she goes up to the front door? It's the mailbox. So you see her like in her winter coat, getting on her tiptoes, trying to reach in, grab the stuff. Because what is she looking for?
A letter from Sam.
Something that says her name on it. And yeah, you'll get stuff every now and then from it, but it's exciting to get the mail. Source F kind of taps into that idea. Where it's the guy talking about I'm going to write more cards and things like that. Because if you take a look at Source F, you're dealing probably more so with like a nostalgic viewpoint of the mail. As you get older, you're starting to get college stuff. You might have received your first one and gone, they want me. Edinburgh wants me. Who knew? Now you're going, I have a pile of all this stuff and I don't want to deal with it anymore. Most mail I get is going to be junk mail or it's going to be bills. And honestly, when it comes to bills, most of my stuff now I just get delivered electronically so I don't get the mail. You could take a look at the junk mail. It sustains the post office because it's still businesses using it. I do sometimes get some flyers that I'll look and go, hey, that seems like a good deal. Let me call them up, and so I'm helping out the business. If you're looking at it from an eco standpoint, you could argue that all that stuff's not getting recycled the way that it probably should be, and Sean's throwing it in the garbage, and now, we're creating a greater carbon footprint and messing up the world, shame on him. So that's a way where you certainly could kind of take a look at a source, could have some positives, could have some negatives to it. I think source A is a good one because it gives you a lot of options that you could look at. And that tends to be a trend with a lot of the sources where you'll get something that it's pretty neutral for the most part, but it gives you some ideas of things that you could take a look at. Whether it be something like getting into the e-business. And Sean, I don't know if this is when you started thinking about Amazon or whatnot. But the whole idea about having email, so address it from the post office, so at least it's kind of relevant and within your mind. The Amazon model, since we figured out it opened in '95, founded in '94, Amazon only sold books, and then sometime in the early 2000s is when you had it kind of transitioning over into other things. It was not profitable for a lot of years, but they were establishing relevancy. So you could argue that, you know what, by a young age, if you are getting involved at least with email or some kind of social media type networking thing where the post office is relevant, yes, that would give you some idea for ad space and things like that. So you could kind of use the sources together with one another where, hey, you have the mention of the junk mail from like source E, but you could still look at the benefit of advertising with coupons and things of that nature. And certainly post office is starting to do a couple more things with E, printing out your own stamps, the ability to you know, kind of limit runs that you would have to make to purchase some of those things. What's one of the biggest problems? I'm looking at first paragraph in source E that it's running into. It makes sense. Fuel costs. For the most part, tend to keep going up, come down from time to time. But you look at paragraph 1 with source E, fuel costs. If you're looking to kind of rebrand yourself a little bit and get into other aspects of day-to-day life, what might be some options for post office when it comes to fuel consumption? Electric. The drones. I mean, Amazon.
Go the way of Amazon.
And whatnot. If you're dealing with more delivery points, source B, and fewer staff, source B, but you have fuel costs becoming an issue, source E, maybe it's time to rebrand the way that you sell your company, source A, and use drones, electric cars, natural gas, solar-powered vehicles, super bicycles, whatever. Sean's going to be on a Segway.
Bro! Whole sidecar of mail. That's sick.
The nice thing, if you were to use something like this, and you come up with alternative fuels or transportation, you are, listen up, you are creating ownership of the argument at that point, because there's not a source in there that talks about using, natural gas, electricity, solar power, hybrid, whatever the case may be, but it mentions an issue, a problem that they're having with cost. You start to kind of bring up a solution. Yes, there could be an initial cost. There could be a problem with purchasing the type of vehicles or whatever machinery you're going to need. But in the long run, it could certainly help with it. And the drones would be the same thing, dropping your little Santa's letters off at different places. But this would give you ownership where you're using the source as a way to kind of come up with an argument, but you're driving where you're ultimately going with it. Again, you're not going to be responsible for what is the cost of new kinds of transportation, but you're at least throwing out an idea that we kind of keep up with the times, so to speak, through 2020s, 30s, that might make the post office a little bit more sustainable and cut back on day-to-day operation costs with fuel, postal workers, things of that nature. Concern if you cut back on jobs, though, is what's ultimately going to happen with different people. It might be an issue where as folks retire, you start to kind of transition new technology as opposed to going, hey, this mail carrier out, you're now replaced by the little flying helicopter drone thing with big and out of the job. But what they would be looking for would be you to at least kind of come up with some different ideas, concepts, that how could it possibly sustain itself. What do you make of source G?
Useless. Big old brand of patriotism. Well,
It shows how it's an American tradition.
So you have some patriotism. Byron, you're saying having a 4x4 post office in the middle of Florida is...
No, I mean, I just saw the source on. There's no way I'm using it, so that makes me go.
Okay.
also, having a 4x4 post office.
Well, I sort of knew what I was going to talk about, and I wasn't probably going to talk about. You could chasey little.
If depending on the argument that you were going with, if you're using the nostalgia from source F before, I think it would probably make sense to kind of tap into the patriotism and traditional angle that it's something we've been using since 1790. To simply get rid of it now because it seems inconvenient to us or out of date might not be appropriate. I could see someone where if you were looking to cut back on delivery points, as those points are going higher and higher, it might be time to consolidate. You could go, how much mail really is going through this post office in the middle of the Everglades? At the same time, you could also argue, though, what does the post office do, whether you are in a rural place like this, in the middle of nowhere, you still have some type of connection with other people throughout the course of the United States, so you're still going on with it. So I think you could kind of play with a little bit of an emotional angle with the pathos. From a logical angle, you could go, it still provides connection, or this is simply too little too late at places where that's not really going to serve an overall purpose behind it. So it's a source that I think you could use multiple ways, but if you wanted to go with something as it's always been an American tradition of the Postal Service, you referencing source G would be perfectly fine with it.
Are the reader's gonna say like, wow, your plan is terrible and it wouldn't actually work, so you lose? Or are they gonna like judge you more on your writing? Because I feel like this is like coming up with a plan to save the post office, but you also have to like write.
It's like
Yeah, no,
it's save Christmas instead of saving Christmas.
You're-
post office.
Regardless of the prompt, talking synthesis, rhetorical analysis, D or Q, the main thing is, can you formulate a clear, coherent, consistent argument and support it? So you very well could come up with a plan that's going to fail. I mean, thousands of businesses have come up with good plans that have failed. They're going to judge, I would say, not so much the plan itself being consistent with what you're talking about. I think the greatest danger that folks would have is they mention a whole bunch of stuff about the post office, but they never come up with a plan. Those are the folks that are going to be dealing with the scores of 3 and 4. Where if you have a clear plan that has merit and there's sources with it, then yeah, 6, 7, 8, those things should be fine.
What if you go up and you say the post office is fine, no problem with it, and you just keep it the way it is?
Really?
Even though the sources seem to suggest otherwise.
I think you could still use the sources in the sense of,
We're just gonna shoot
like this one since it's up. It's still useful. It's providing connection to people who need it. People don't like junk mail, but it still sustains it with like 52% of its business. Employee cutbacks are happening. There's not as many working, so it's something that'll take care of itself in the end. I think you could still have enough for like a status quo.
Okay, fine. Here's my stupid idea that needs to be